The wrongness showed in the first breath he took under the tree. Beneath the fever tree's thin shade, a lion lay on his side with the near foreleg pinned at an angle no rest allows. A loop of wire gripped the paw, flattened fur to skin, and bit so deep that blood had dried in dark lace around the toes. He was awake. He did not rise, he watched. The ranger let the air settle. Heat climbed from the ground in wavering strokes. Flies gathered and lifted, unsure whether the still body meant safety or danger. The lion's ribs moved shallow and steady. His ears flicked once, then stopped, and the whiskers trembled with each exhale. The wire ran from the paw into a snare twist among exposed roots. The knot, doubled back and tightened by struggle, held with a machine's patience. Each time the lion flexed, metal clicked softly against wood. The ground told the rest, a curved dragline from the tall grass, paw prints that staggered, claw scrapes where there was nothing to anchor. He breathed through his mouth to read the wind, found the scent of cat and iron, and the bitter edge of infection. He spoke once, voice no more than a thread. "Easy, big one." The lion answered with the absence of sound. The head stayed down. The eyes, amber gone dull, remained open, but without challenge. He stepped sideways, not straight in, hands loose at his sides, body turned, to present a smaller shape. When the pupils pinched, he waited. When they widened, he stepped. The land made its own announcements, so he did not need to. A drongo's single note, the scrape of a skink over leaves, seed pods clicking above, and always the metallic reply of the wire when pain reminded the leg to fight. Close enough now to see where hair gave way to skin and skin to a ring of angry flesh, he knelt. Swelling had crept from the paw to the joint. A thorn lodged near the dew claw. Flies tested the wound and lifted off when a tremor ran the length of the limb. The lion's breathing shortened for 3 beats, then recovered. In the slant of shade, heat shimmered from the injury in a ripple that had nothing to do with light. He raised the radio with the slow economy he used for any movement near a predator. Coordinates, state of the animal, tools required, number of hands, each given small and plain. The answer came back calm. The vet team was already on the track. He noted the time and folded patience over it. Shade shifted with the sun's climb. The lion's tail lay straight, only the tip twitching when a fly crossed it. The paws of his uninjured foreleg kneaded the ground once, as if testing the idea of standing, then stilled. The mouth opened and closed without sound, not a threat, only a search for a breath that hurt less to take. He set his pack down, wet a clean cloth, and drew a thin line in the sand around the lion's head to slow ants. With a dry frond held like a small broom, he herded flies in slow arcs. The closest eye followed once, and then settled back into that fixed distance animals find when pain is a room with few doors. He scanned the savannah for company, no tail flick in grass, no ripple of bodies holding just beyond sight. He listened for the low-contact call of a lioness, or the rough cry of a subadult asking where the day had put them. Nothing answered. At the root tangle he studied the knot. 2 turns, then a tuck, the tail cinched back, the practiced twist of someone who had made many. He pictured the loop closing, the burst of panic, the angle of pull that tightened it further, the choice the lion had made to stop wasting himself on a device that feeds on effort. Understanding had weight. The solution would need equal care. The radio crackled with an update. The track was rough after a washout. They were 10 minutes away. He marked wind with a strip of cloth, its flutter slight and sure. He walked the ground, rehearsing without hurry. Here the shooter would stand with the dart. Here the cutter would kneel, body just outside the sweep of claws. Here the second would guard the head, ready to shield the eyes and hold the jaw gentle. Calm is a kind of tool. He kept sharpening it. The lion said the minutes out loud. He shifted, and the wire clicked. He flexed, and the paw barely moved. The tongue, dark and dry, pressed briefly to a tooth. The nostrils flared when the ranger poured a little water into the sand near his muzzle. Moisture rose as a scent, not a demand, and the breathing eased. Wind sucked and released in the canopy. The fever tree answered with soft ticks. Heat thickened, then loosened when a cloud crossed the sun. A single vulture circled once and drifted away, refused by the bright, unblinking eyes below. The ground, busy with small movement, accepted the pause in larger business. Time put a hand on their shoulders and agreed to wait. He spoke again, hardly air at all. "We're here." The nearest ear turned a fraction, then settled. The lion's gaze did not challenge or plead. It rested on the place in front of his paw where pain lived, and beyond it, somewhere the ranger could not see. When the engine finally gave its considerate sound, the lion did not react. Dust drew a thin ribbon over the track. The ranger lifted one hand, palm down, letting the vehicle ease to the line he had set. Doors opened without slam. The vet stepped out and looked, not with surprise, but with a field worker's steadiness. Gloves were passed, a case opened, a needle fitted into the dart gun with the care that never grows casual. He pointed once to the wire's bite, to the knot, to the wind flag. No voices rose. No one stepped too close. The lion blinked. The tail tip tapped the sand. The ranger felt the shape of the next hour arrive, a dart, a slow-sinking, careful hands, the high note of cutters biting metal, the slack loop, the wash, the bandage, the long, watchful wait. But for now he let the moment hold its clean edge. Before medicine, before tools, the work was to keep calm from fraying. He settled into it, weight even, shoulders loose, fingers open, eyes steady. The sun made coins of light in the leaves, and a thin green smell bled from sap where bark had scored. A beetle pushed a ball of earth past his boot and over a root's lip, then went on with its purpose. The lion's breaths lengthened by a measure too small for numbers and yet enough to read. The eyes closed for a heartbeat and opened again. Behind him, a colleague unrolled a tarp and laid it ready without fuss. Another checked the cutters, tested the hinge, and set them within reach. The world obeyed the quiet choreography that separates harm from help. He thought of the old scars and what they meant, an animal who had already met men's devices and outlived them, an animal who chose shade instead of panic this time. Not wisdom, as people name it, adaptation shaped by pain and heat. Respect rose from that recognition, simple and heavy. The vet raised the gun and sighed the breath that smooths a hand. The ranger watched the wind flag and nodded when its slackness promised a true line. In the bright hush between decision and act, the lion closed his eyes for one deliberate blink, conserving a last inch of strength for the step he could not take alone. The dart would fly softly. That was the next chapter forming. In this one, the lion lay where he had chosen to lie, and the ranger kept the agreement that had formed in the shade, to be near without crowding, to wait without rushing, to hold the space between suffering and relief, so it did not grow wider than it had to be. Wind moved through the leaves and went on, and the ground accepted every careful footprint made around the still, enduring body. The dart struck with the sound of nothing more than a twig snapping. The lion flinched once, then steadied, his ribs still lifting with deliberate breath. The sedative began its slow work, drawn through muscle to blood, calming what had already been still. Around him, The air thickened with the watchful pause that comes before men take their careful steps toward a predator. The rangers waited, giving the medicine time to reach its depth. Each minute stretched, measured by the slight droop of the lion's eyelids, the easing of muscles beneath his flank, the tail's last twitch before it lay quiet in the dust. When the head finally settled to the side, they read the signs with experience. The chest still rose, the ear flicked faintly, but the weight of his body had loosened enough to approach. They moved as though the ground might break beneath them if rushed. A hand on the radio confirmed the time. Another lifted the canvas tarp, spreading it where tools would rest clean against the sand. The vet knelt first, placing gloved fingers at the rise of the chest, counting heartbeats beneath fur. Slow, steady. The lion's mouth hung open slightly, his tongue darkened by dust, his whiskers trembling with each shallow exhale. The wire snare showed its cruelty in full light now. It had coiled tightly around the paw, just above the toes, slicing a ring where skin met metal. Fur had vanished there, replaced by swollen tissue rimmed in dried blood. A sour smell rose faintly, the kind of scent that told of infection already taking hold. Flies hovered, drawn but wary, circling and returning again. The vet nodded once. 2 rangers steadied the leg gently, careful not to twist or bend. One whispered, "Not for the lion, but for the men. Easy, he's listening." And it felt true, for even beneath sedation, the lion's open eyes watched, not wide, not afraid, only fixed, holding them without aggression. The cutters met the wire with a bite of steel against steel. It resisted at first, hardened by strain, but pressure built until the line snapped with a muted crack. The loop fell slack, leaving the paw bare, to reveal how deep it had bitten. Blood welled briefly, fresh against the dry crust, before gauze pressed down to stem it. The ranger holding the leg kept his grip firm but gentle, one hand beneath the joint, as though carrying something fragile rather than restraining power. They worked in silence except for soft instruction. "More saline. Gauze here. Hold steady." Water poured clear over the wound, carrying threads of dirt and dark blood into the soil. The lion's paw twitched once, an involuntary tremor, but no growl followed. His breath remained shallow, his gaze unbroken. The infection showed in swelling that extended past the wound, skin stretched taut. The vet drew a syringe from the kit, antibiotics measured with precision, and delivered the dose into muscle. A second needle followed, an anti-inflammatory to quiet the body's protest. Each movement was deliberate, unhurried. The lion's chest rose and fell, slower now, as if conserving what strength remained. Around them, the land seemed to lean in. Wind pressed through the fever tree above, rattling seed pods like hollow bells. A hornbill landed nearby, cocking its head once before lifting again. The ground, scored with old drag marks from the lion's struggle, now bore the prints of men kneeling, crouching, steadying themselves. 2 stories pressed together: struggle and release. One ranger brushed dust gently from the lion's mane where it had clung in clumps. Another poured a trickle of water near his muzzle, wetting the soil so coolness lifted into the air. The lion's nostrils flared faintly, recognizing the change. His eyes, though dulled by sedation, tracked the faintest shift of light. He had not surrendered to panic, only watched, endured, allowed. They wrapped the paw with clean bandage, layer upon layer, until the wound lay hidden, pressure even but not cruel. The leg looked smaller then, more vulnerable than the body it carried. For a moment, silence deepened so completely that each breath sounded like a tide pulling in. The vet placed a hand gently against the lion's side, reading heart and lung once more, steady as before. One ranger, the youngest, exhaled words without thinking. He knew we were coming. The others did not answer, but the quiet agreement showed in the way they worked, slower still, more reverent. The lion, this animal built of muscle and command, lay unmoving, and yet the moment felt not like dominance but permission. Time passed without notice. Shadows shortened, then stretched again as the sun crossed its line. The bandage was secured, the tools cleaned, the wire snare folded into a bag as evidence and warning both. They marked down coordinates, temperature, doses given. Every note was practical, but beneath it lay an unspoken weight, that the silence of the lion had carried them through. When they finished, they did not rise immediately. They stayed, one hand resting lightly against fur, another watching the slow lift of ribs. Wind swept the clearing and carried with it the sharp tang of antiseptic, mixed with the lion's wild musk. A partnership of necessity, born not from choice but from the need to undo what human hands had set into the land. The sedation would ease soon, and the lion would reclaim his body. They prepared for distance, checking their route back, clearing their tools. Still no roar came, no lash of tail or flare of teeth, only the steady watchfulness of eyes that did not close, even as medicine pulled at them. The silence remained, unbroken, except by shallow breaths and the faint rasp of gauze pressed smooth against a wound. The rangers stepped back finally, letting the shade fall full across the lion's body. They left water near his muzzle, cool in a shallow tin, and packed their gear. The youngest glanced back once more before turning, the words still shaping his breath, though unspoken now. The lion lay as he had been found, but the wire was gone. Around him, the silence was no longer heavy. It was clean, like a pause before the next chapter the land itself would write. They saw the first old mark when the vet lifted the mane to check the pulse along the jaw. Beneath the coarse hair, a pale groove ringed the neck and then hid again, a narrow collar of skin where a snare had once tightened and later slipped free. The lion lay quiet under sedation, but his eyes stayed open and steady, watching without fight as gloved hands measured breath and time. The fresh bandage on his foreleg lay clean and white against tawny coat. Around it the dust was scribbled with knee prints, a shallow dish of water dampening the sand near his muzzle. The iron of blood still kept a small place in the air, mingled now with saline and antiseptic. When the vet eased her hand beneath the heavy jaw, the mane lifted enough to show the rest of that neck ring and the roughened skin where hair would never fully return. They returned to their tasks, but the eye, once taught to notice, could not stop reading. On the shoulder, just behind the blade, a healed seam ran like a careful stitch, raised a little above the surrounding skin. Near the hip, a matched pair of puncture scars sat too neat to be thorns, the measured memory of teeth that had closed and released. The right ear wore a notch cut along a straight line instead of torn by branches. Each trace belonged to a different season. Together they formed a record, the body's plain archive. A ranger placed his palm lightly on the ribs and counted by feel. Another swept flies with the dry frond in slow arcs that never touched the face. The field held still around a body that had learned, more than once, how to live under pressure. They rolled him the width of a hand to clean beneath, and more history surfaced. A broad, faint scar crossed the belly at a slant, whitened and flat, as if rope or wire had burned there long ago. The vet brushed sand away with the back of a glove and studied its direction without touching. "Old wire," she said, almost not speaking. No one added pity. Pity had no work to do here. Celine ran over the foreleg in a clear thread, carrying diluted blood into dust that swallowed it at once. The paw twitched under a reflex the sedative could not quiet. The vet steadied the joint without pressure and waited for the tremor to pass. The lion's whiskers moved once, reading the breeze for what it held. Men and medicine, the flat heat of early afternoon, the small cool lifted by wet sand. They began to write what they could see so the record would be honest. Neck ring scar, healed flank laceration, paired punctures at the hip, ear notch, belly burn, a thickened ridge along the near foreleg where bone had answered past strain, a chipped right canine smoothed by time. They had read similar pages on other bodies, but this combination, layered and varied, spoke of repeated brushes with traps and fights and the plain accidents of the wild, and of a body that had kept choosing to mend. The older ranger kept his hands steady and his eyes loose. The grass not far off held a low tunnel where animals passed often. At the mouth of it the soil carried shallow stamps half softened by wind, small and close together, the kind made when a light creature steps with care. He did not point them out. He kept them where weather and questions are kept, in the pocket of attention. They adjusted the bandage to leave room for swelling and taped the edge smooth. A dose of antibiotic went into muscle with measured pressure. The lion's hide shivered along the spine, a ripple to the tail and gone. He did not lift his head, he did not bare his teeth. He watched, alert under sleep, and let the work continue. The quiet deepened until wind combing the canopy felt like its own small instruction. One ranger teased dust out of the mane with gloved fingers until the ropes of hair loosened. Another re-wetted the sand so cool air rose to the muzzle. The nostrils widened and settled. The youngest finally found a line light enough for the day. He's carried this before. It left his mouth and changed nothing, which was right. By mid-afternoon, the wound of today looked less like crisis and more like labor the body would take on in the coming weeks. Swelling to be endured, a bandage to be tolerated, a leg guarded until it remembered strength. The vet's notes were neat: doses, times, color, pulse, and beside the numbers, brief phrases in an even hand: historic snare scarring, multiple healed lesions, demeanor tolerant, non-reactive. Facts without sentiment, yet the page carried a gravity that did not need more ink. When the last tool was cleaned, they allowed themselves the longer look that had been waiting. Scars are small until you add them up. Then they scale to the size of a life. He had been trapped and fought free. He had been cut and healed to the color of dry grass. Somewhere along the years he had learned that stillness saves more blood than struggle when metal tightens and the ground offers no purchase. Today he had laid that learned stillness in front of human hands without a sound. They gave him room as the sedative began to lift, stepping beyond the arc his waking body might claim. Shade shifted and returned. The lion blinked slowly, lids heavy over eyes that did not lose their hold. His ear turned toward the thorn thicket where grass knitted itself thick. A sound came from it, only a scrape on dry stems. It might have been a lizard. It might have been wind. The older ranger filed it with the small prints and said nothing. Ordinary things kept their rhythm. Cicadas rose and thinned. The severed snare lay coiled in a bag, not dangerous anymore. There would be another loop somewhere, set for anything that fit inside it. They would talk later with herders about fences and losses and the kind of harm that does not know what it takes. The lion's breathing changed by degrees a stranger would miss, longer draws, followed by slower returns. He swallowed once and the bandaged leg shifted, printing a soft shape into dust. The vet nodded and settled to wait for the moment when he would try to stand. No one spoke about scars now. They had been named. The pattern mattered more. A gust ran through the thicket and brought a faint smell that tugged at memory. Milk thinned by heat and dust. The older ranger watched nothing and learned from it, the way some lessons are taken without eyes. The lion's ear turned there a second time and stayed for 3 breaths before easing back. The younger man opened his mouth and closed it. Knowing can be quiet. They would remain until the body took itself back and could rise, and a bit longer after that, so waking did not turn into another trap. Panic, a blind rush into thorn, a bandage snagged and torn. The sun lowered and softened colour, even the white of the wrap. The lion exhaled and drew a deeper breath, and for the first time since the dart, the heavy head tilted as if the ground had loosened its hold. What lay across his flanks and neck was not a pile of damages, but a ledger of choices under pressure. He had retreated, healed, and returned to his roots more than once. He had learned where shade holds at noon and where water lies shallow enough to cross. Today he had remained when another might have dragged the wire until it bit deeper. He had stayed in the square of shade and used endurance in place of flight. The youngest ranger followed the line from old scars to present stillness, and then to the thicket's mouth where delicate marks had nearly blown away. He kept his hands still and his thoughts unspoken. The day had told them enough for now. The lion breathed, watching with them, his past written in pale lines across skin, and his reason for not leaving fixed somewhere in the grass, near and low, held quiet by the wind. The first sound came just as the sedative began to loosen its grip. The lion stirred, his heavy head lifting a fraction before falling back again, eyes slitting against the light. The rangers had shifted into a patient rhythm, one checking his pulse, another keeping the bandage clean, the others watching the line of horizon for threat or movement. The silence had held for hours, broken only by wind and the faint scrape of insects in the dust. Then from the grass at the edge of the clearing, a thin cry threaded into the stillness. Not a bird, not the high whine of hyrax or hare, but something softer, broken and familiar only to those who had heard it before. One ranger stilled, head turning, and the rest followed without a word. The sound came again, fainter, swallowed by the weight of grass, but it was there, undeniable. The lion's ears shifted. His body, still weak, responded to that call more than to their touch or presence. His nostrils widened, taking in the scent carried on the breeze. The rangers exchanged a glance. It was not unusual for lionesses to keep cubs hidden, far from where males rested. But here, with this wounded male, something did not fit. The cry repeated, a trembling thread that belonged to hunger and waiting. Cautious, they rose, leaving one man with the lion, while the others moved toward the sound. Each step pressed down grass brittle from the dry season. The nearer they came, the clearer the rustling became, small movements, uncoordinated, the shuffle of tiny bodies trying to stay hidden. A thorn thicket, thick with tangled stems, held the source. They knelt, parting the grass gently, and there they saw them. 2 cubs, no older than 3 weeks, crouched low in the dust. Their coats were pale and spotted, their eyes clouded still with the blue-grey of infancy. They blinked into the light, too weak to retreat, too young to understand what moved around them. Ribs pressed sharp beneath thin skin, and their paws shook when they shifted closer together. The rangers held the moment quietly, recognizing need before it spoke. Behind them, the lion stirred again, His head lifted fully now, mane falling in uneven ropes, and he turned toward the thicket. His bandaged leg shifted in the dust. A low rumble, more breath than sound, moved from his chest. Not a roar, not warning, a call. The cubs responded at once, their cries sharper now, reaching for the sound that anchored them. The rangers stepped back, letting the line between father and offspring remain clear. One whispered, almost reverent, "He stayed for them." The words carried no judgment, only recognition. The vet moved closer to the lion, crouching low, gauging his strength. His eyes tracked the cubs through the grass. He made no attempt to rise, his body too heavy with medicine, his leg too swollen to bear weight, but he did not need to. His presence, his stillness, had already been their shield. In the time he could have fled, dragged by panic into deeper harm, he had remained. The rangers began small measures for the cubs, a shallow dish of water poured slowly so the sound of it reached their ears. One cub nosed forward, uncertain, while the other stayed pressed against its sibling's side. Hunger showed in their movements, the hesitant way they searched for milk that was not there. But thirst drew them near, and when their tongues touched the damp edge of sand, they drank in fits, pulling back, then returning again. The lion's gaze never left them. His breaths came deeper now, steadier, his body slowly reclaiming itself from sedation. He shifted once, as though to reassure himself of their nearness, then let his head sink back to the earth. The rumble in his chest faded, but the bond was plain in every movement of ear and eye. The rangers stood in a loose circle, not interfering beyond what was needed. To handle cubs was to invite rejection by their pride later, so they kept their distance, giving only what would keep them alive until the father could rise again. Shade was extended by pulling a canvas sheet across a branch line, giving relief from the sun without touching the thicket. A quiet was kept, the kind that carried respect more than restraint. The youngest ranger crouched low, elbows on knees, watching the way the cubs pressed together before venturing a step. "They waited with him," he said softly, but no one answered. The truth did not need to be spoken more than once. As afternoon turned, the cubs grew bolder. They moved from the grass to the lion's side, nudging against his mane, pressing their small bodies into the curve of his neck. He shifted slightly, enough to allow their weight against him. His paw, still wrapped in clean bandage, flexed but did not move closer, the restraint of sedation still in place. The rangers watched in silence, letting the scene unfold without interruption. What had seemed at first only endurance now revealed its purpose. The lion had not lain still beneath the fever tree because he had surrendered. He had lain there because leaving would have meant leaving them. His stillness had been choice, not defeat. When the sun lowered, shadows stretched long across the clearing. The cubs, tired now, curled into the hollow between his front legs. Their breathing softened, matching his. The bandage glowed pale against tawny fur, a mark of intervention that did not disturb the balance of what they were. The rangers prepared for nightfall. Supplies were gathered, notes written, but they moved more slowly than before. Every action felt measured by what they had seen. The older ranger lingered a moment longer, gaze steady on the sight of father and young. "He waited," he said, the words carried away on wind before anyone could answer. The day closed with a quiet heavier than silence. The lion rested, his cubs pressed into his chest, the thicket holding them close. Beyond the grass, dusk built itself in layers of violet and red. The rangers left the space as they had found it, except for the absence of wire, except for the presence of bandage, except for the knowledge that endurance had sheltered more than one life. At first light, the fever tree cast a narrow shade over the clearing, and the lion met the day with a longer breath. The cubs had slept in the hollow of his chest, waking to nuzzle his mane and falling back into the rhythm his body kept. Dust had turned the bandage the color of grass. Recovery came in small returns. He flexed the good foreleg, set its paw beneath him, and waited out the ache that answered from the wrapped one. When the pain thinned, he tried again. Shoulder first, then chest, then the heavy head. A pause to read his own weight, a second try. The cubs stirred, uncertain, then pressed closer, a quiet vote for the ground they knew. The rangers had kept their distance through the cool hours before dawn, listening to jackal calls knit and unknit. Now they stood in a loose arc beyond the tree, leaving open the track that angled to the grassland. One set a shallow bowl beneath a root and filled it from a flask. Water shone like a small sky. The lion's ear turned, then settled back to the work of standing. He pushed with the hind legs. The wrapped paw took weight and gave it back, and breath left him in a low grunt, more air than sound. He paused, let the tremor fade, and tried again, stealing balance from the sore limb so it served as counter rather than pillar. This time the rise held. He stood a fraction lower on the left, ribs widening under the claim of gravity. The head came higher, the face found sun. The cubs tried their own rise, wobbling, then scrambling with the clumsy insistence of bodies new to steadiness. They bumped, corrected, and reached his side. One nosed the bandage and recoiled at its roughness. The other rubbed the sound leg, learning the line that would carry them forward. The lion looked down once and then out beyond the fever tree to the pale sweep where paths braid and thin. He stepped, careful, the wrapped paw hovering and touching only when balance demanded. Dust lifted in a faint ring and fell back. A second step, then a third, each chosen as if the earth might shift if hurried. When he paused, the cubs paused, leaning into his legs. No one moved. They passed the dish and he drank in short pulls, lifting to swallow, lowering again. He did not linger. He took the corridor of grass that opened like a seam between thorn clumps. The rangers gave him the lane, stepping aside rather than back, faces turned not to him, but to the space he asked for. Quiet held. The lion used it. Each stride argued with the bandage and then forgave it. The cubs learned his tempo within 3 steps, brushing and falling back, quickening to catch the swing of his tail. At the first line of tall grass he stopped, not to look behind, but to read the day ahead. Last night's hyena drift, the thin thread of water south, a scatter of lizard tracks written like straight script. He turned slightly to ease pressure on the sore limb and found an angle that asked less. The cubs chased a beetle, lost it, and hurried to his ribs as though a string had tugged them. One ranger let go the single thought he had carried since noon the day before. He waited for them. It crossed the air without disturbing it, true enough to stay small. The others did not answer. The morning's work was nearly finished. They walked. The clearing behind them thinned to memory faster than sight would admit. The limp gave their line a pulse. The cubs' small steps filled the gaps. When he tired, he stood and let the sun warm the bandage until the ache softened. When he moved, he did not waste direction. Grass closed over their ankles and opened again, seeds brushing the cubs' backs like rain that never fell. The rangers followed only so far as duty required, far enough to see the bandage hold and the gate refuse harm, near enough to intervene, only if danger came from the world they represented. They spoke little, notes were made, coordinates marked. The severed snare lay coiled in a pack like a quiet promise to return until fewer such circles hid in the grass. At the edge of a shallow rise, the lion paused and lowered himself with the slow decision of a tree in still air. The cubs folded into the space between his forelegs and slept with the full trust of the uncounting young. Wind travelled from a place where water held in shadow. The rangers stopped too and waited without reason other than to match the pace of what they had helped begin. When he rose again, it was with less argument. A path cut by zebra hooves offered firmer soil, and he took it, saving the bad leg from the give of sand. The cubs understood by nearness, walking in the lee of his shoulder, sometimes tangling themselves underfoot, and untangling without complaint. By late afternoon the sun had thinned to a pale coin, and the fever tree was no more than an idea behind them. The land widened into a plain edged by low rocks that kept a little shade, and the memory of water. The lion steered there with the modest pace of one who knows each step spends something. He kept his head level, listening more than looking. The rangers stood where the grass began to erase tracks. They did not call out. They did not try to fix the moment with more than it was owed. The youngest let a second line whisper itself free. "Go well." It left no mark. The lion crested the rise with his small company. He did not turn. The cubs, tired now, brushed his legs and sighed their small sounds into the day. He placed the wrapped paw, lifted it, placed it again, and the distance answered by growing small. Their shapes took the merciful size that distance gives to things that continue. When they passed from sight, the wind laid its hand over the grass and drew a sound like quiet water. The bowl beneath the tree held its shallow sky and a rough circle where a tongue had passed. The severed wire rested, harmless, in a dark pocket. The men stood for a while, then turned to their track, and the light closed over their footprints the way evening closes over heat, gradual, ordinary, complete.